Today, I'm joined by Florian Heinrichs, founder of Client Friendly and a co-host of the Unbillable Hours podcast. Florian and I have known each other for a few years now. He actually had me on as a podcast guest in the past, and we've swapped notes about our podcasts to help each other out. Florian, I'm excited to be on the other side of the mic and have a chance to talk with you again. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, John. Very pleased to be able to sort of return the favor. I do remember you were in the first flight of guests we had way back when we started, not necessarily the podcast, but we thought what we had was good enough to invite other people to it. Yeah, no, that was great. Good to see that you're still in the space and in the industry.
Yeah, I love podcasts. I'm an avid podcast listener and, run a podcast marketing agency. So definitely need to be in the space. Can you give our listeners an overview of your firm, Client Friendly, and how you help professional services firms?
Yeah, so Client Friendly is an advisory firm, for lack of a better word, and we help mid-sized consultancies of a certain size and predicament. I can get to that. And professionalize their business development efforts, right? I think about business development very much as a sort of a life cycle stage type thing, where maybe at the outset and up to a certain size, you do business development or you do founder-led sales, for lack of a better word, right? And that's fine. And you can grow the firm quite a bit through that. And you say yes to a lot of things, and maybe you don't have that much insight into what's our specific segment, what's the specific stuff and all that. If you ever wanted to push beyond that and become a bit more structured and strategic, and then lo and behold, maybe even layer on some strategic marketing, so combining business development and marketing, then we would be able to advise you. We have a program, comes in around 4 months, where we take people through some sprints and put the things in place they need to have a lean but mean in-house capability.
So you mentioned that you help businesses of a very specific size solve specific challenges. Is that a recent kind of more intentional focus of yours, or?
Oh, that's a learning. Sure. I started when we spoke, I was still with Accenture. I had a global marketing leader, in-house guy, and I very deliberately quit that and founded a firm. And this wasn't even like the COVID, I'm leaving type of wave. I had plans drawn up and everything. But then I had to learn that you think you understand how stuff works, but you still need to learn a few things. And with that, so segmentation, right? Who do we help? Important question. If you do business development, I set out and thought, okay, I'm working for the mid-sized firms, and that's it. Then I learned that, of course, that's a very vague term, and you have to really define what the sizing is. And then we went from, I think it's 10 people and up, which was wrong, to maybe it's 25-ish, because that's one of the learnings I had in successful firms. About 4% of all available hours goes towards business development. That means once you hit 25 people, you have one person taking care of business development marketing full time. Turns out still too small, and these specific growing pains, this particular feeling we need to find in our market, is when the firm just runs into the wall of its own success. Like they have exhausted the opportunity you can get from business development, networking, referrals. They've gotten so good at it, they're at the end of their wits. They need something new. And that apparently seems to be more often true for firms 50 people and up, which that's now the segment. So 50 to 250 people. And like I said, specific problems. It comes down to two things. These folks either want to push through the growth plateau and into the next stage. So they want to grow either revenue or profitability with better clients, because there's still some appetite. That's one group. And the other group is because they are seeking to hand the firm over or exit. And then the motivation is not so much help us grow further. It's more a help me systematize it, help me, structure the stuff we do inside an in-house capability that offers some value to whoever takes my baby out of my hand. And these are two sort of subgroups that we are working with. Yeah.
It's very interesting. And I imagine that the approaches you take are different depending on those different growth goals, whether it's to grow revenue or to grow profit. I like the systematizing of the operations for scale, right? After the transition.
Yeah, I don't know. To be quite honest, the process is very consistent. So I don't know how much detail you where with Bryce there. So we do 4 things. I think there's 4 things you gotta nail if you want to have proper business development. The one is strategy, right? You need a proper business development strategy. Obvious. This is where we talk about what is market segmentation, what's the positioning, what's the value proposition derived from your business strategy. Next thing we do is we look at client journey design. This is where we also talk about offering and service design, which that's become my hobby horse. There's another thing I learned over the past 3 years is I always thought strategy positioning is where it's at, and you read a lot about that. You read about how consultancies have to position. Turns out that this is, while it's true, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, because I meet so many firms that are still in the I'm selling my capability business. And it's very difficult to do business development for that, because essentially what they say is, I mean, you talk to professional services firm, broader set, right? We talk to management consultancies, but broader set professional service development. A tax advisory might say capability selling, right? We sell tax advisory. Do you need some? And that's a very difficult proposition to go to market with. So we were probably in a client journey design sprint. We would help them fashion some more tangible offerings. Say, let's build a 6 months family business tax savings in the case of handover type program, right? So you are handing over your family business to your successors. What's the tax plan? So that could be an offering, and then it becomes easier to think about what's the client journey to pull someone towards that. That's sprint 2. And then 3 is where we talk about storytelling. So that's where all the messaging and then derived from that thought leadership plan comes into play. The last part, and this is where it differs in the last part, we call that the system sprint. It's not about software, it's just about establishing the routines that help you run a program consistently, right? So sort of crank the handle we put in on the client journey design over and over again within the constraints of your firm. So some firms that work with have a 15-person marketing department, so we have a team of 1. How can we build a system around whatever is there that ensures, back to that point, the brilliant basics get done every day and everybody's clear on what needs to happen on a daily basis. And then that's it.
So it's strategy and customer journey.
Strategy, journey, story, and system is how we
story and systems. Excellent.
Yes, exactly.
That's a great format, a great framework. So, Florian, I'd love to shift gears a little bit. I'd like to talk about your podcast, Unbillable Hours. I was looking at the podcast platforms, and it only goes back to January 2022. I could have sworn you've been doing the show for longer than that. It says the first episode is season 8, episode 4. What can you let's establish a timeline?
It's probably older than that, and I forget, because I should say, just so we're clear for listeners, Unbillable Hours is actually predates Client Friendly. It's a product of love, which I set that up with a former colleague of mine and a friend of mine who also works he still works at Accenture. So that's also another reason why it's not a Client Friendly vehicle. We had conversations about how we were trying to improve what our teams were trying to do at that firm for a while. And when COVID struck, we were like, we should just turn this. Honestly, before that, it was a bit of a venting session almost. Kind of like an internal, let's cry a bit and complain thing. But we turned it into something more constructive and recorded it. And that's how we stumbled into it. And it's been fun enough to just keep doing it. I think we'll hit the 3-year mark in April. I think it was April 21. I gotta go back.
I think that sounds about right. So you mentioned it started off as kind of like a venting session. Can you just talk about how the show has evolved over time from that venting session to where it is today?
Yeah, so it's a bit embarrassing because you're being the professional podcast guy, but I think it's because it's a very unprofessional thing still. So we had specific problems or specific things we wanted to do in the daily business. We sort of started there. Of course, we couldn't talk about internal affairs and whatnot, but we could ask ourselves, I don't know, if you had all your budget depleted and you wanted to do another killer initiative, right? And it costs, I don't know, it's a six figure thing. Well, how would you build the pitch internally? What's a business case for an add-on? there were some questions we had in the day-to-day. We would take that and we would riff about it. And once we had what we felt was the beginning of a good enough answer, we just hit record. And for some reason, people liked it well enough. And then obviously we did the second thing for the cases where we did not have an answer. We just invited people who knew better. And to this day, that is still the case. So we still have episodes where it's just Ash and myself. So I'm doing this podcast with a colleague. Like I always did that, but yeah. So it's like a body show a little bit. Probably not as entertaining as the better body shows out there, and then sometimes we have guests on, right, for special topics, and we try to get a good mix of sort of practice leaders from various firms, and then just people who are in the trenches of the various marketing pieces of the game. I think back in the day we had you on about podcasts. Do I remember that correctly? Because you were running the Hinge podcast at the time. So we just wrapped up an episode with someone who spoke to us about LinkedIn advertising, the professional services space. So yeah, that's how we try to bring in outside expertise and also learn ourselves. It's a very nifty vehicle for my own education, right? You get to talk to a bunch of great people just because you have a podcast.
That's one of the cool things about having a podcast is you can talk to very interesting people and have really interesting conversations. I'm curious. I noticed that your podcast right now is on season 27, episode 5. It seems like I'm just really curious. How do you approach the seasons in the episodes and packaging all that?
That's because I had when we started this, I had no clue what I was doing, so I don't know what seasons are and how it works. And I have to say, and this might sound nerdy or whatever, but I almost watch no TV or shows. Like I was a huge Simpsons fan, so I'm following a couple of things. But if you were to ask me, like how many episodes in a typical season of a TV show, I wouldn't even know that. But for some reason we landed on, okay, let's just make 5 episodes and that's one season. So just ridiculous. And then it became a joke over time because so many people told us how confusing the numbering was that I thought, okay, fine. Which I think that is maybe my encouragement or the takeaways for the listeners. Like there's probably no way you can put less effort into a podcast and still to produce something that still has sort of enough quality to draw listenership. But I would encourage people to give it a shot because yeah, you can like put a massive editorial calendar, have all kinds of planning, pre-schedule everything, or you can go every 2 weeks as we do, and we are owning the fact that's a bit of a hobby show, right, or a side gig thing. So we're not too professional, which I think that's a good lesson maybe for your listeners here. Is you can absolutely give this podcast thing a try, especially if you're in professional services. You can make it a super duper overproduced thing of beauty, or you can run it like we run Unbillable Hours, which is just take note of the questions and the discussions you have in your day-to-day, right? And turn that into a show. And we have weeks where we schedule an hour for recording. Episodes are 30 minutes. And a good production flow might be I write Ash something on Tuesday, or he writes me something on Wednesday, and do we want to discuss this? And then we think about it for the Thursday, and then we use the first 30 minutes of the recording to structure the episode, right? So just so listeners so effectively what it takes out of sort of active work on the diary in the week is the hour on Friday, right? Which if you think about billable hours and experts having no time, that's a very lean setup you can run. Yeah. And I think that's one of the benefits you have if you are in professional services, because you are so close to the clients and the topics of interest, and you will have a view on those because that's your job, right? In a way. If my business was in producing yogurts or designing cars or like making widgets, whatever, a podcast will be an add-on. In the world I live in, a podcast is just me repeating what I said to a client last Thursday, just, refined for the public. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the idea. I think it's the best, it's almost like the best, leanest way of producing any type of content for professional services.
That is a trend that I'm noticing too. I was talking with Ryan Willard of the Business of Architecture, and he was talking about how the show originally started as an interview-based show, but recently Ryan has been interviewing his co-host, Enoch Sears, and they've been able to produce more more content because they're not beholden to guest interviews. And so I think that does give you a little bit more control over the production process, and it takes out that outreach and scheduling and coordinating calendars part to it. So your point's well taken.
And yeah, I mean, and it's one of the biggest unlocks in all of professional services marketing is if you can increase the overlap. So Venn diagram of content, right? Right-hand side is content produced for a specific client, and then left-hand side is content produced for your entire market or audience. If you keep those two separate, all right, you just have you have two things to work on as an organization. If you can overlap those as max as possible, that's a lot of efficiency gain. And having a podcast where two of your experts, to your point, right, from in-house, talk to each other about, what were some critical problems you encountered last month and how did we respond to it and so forth. You don't have to give confidential information away or name clients or get into specific, but you can talk shop and record yourself, and you will find that people find that very interesting. Probably more interesting than your sort of artificially created 5 reasons why you need a digital transformation listicle blog post, right? Because that's not close to the practice of consulting, whereas what you might have to say on a podcast is, that's why it's better.
Yes, 100%. And I think it's also important to note that if you launch a show, you don't need to pigeonhole yourself into that one format. I think your Unbillable Hours podcast is a great example of how, you and Ash do have those conversations, but from time to time you do bring on guests to bring in other perspective. And so that kind of leads me to my next question of, over the course of your experience running this show, you mentioned the growth of the show, but I'm a little bit more curious about the growth of you personally. How has this podcast had an impact on you and your career?
It's my number one reason to do it. And I have joked in our own show before about how I would still do it if the only one who ever listened was my mom. If you have a fixed date in your calendar where you force yourself to speak somewhat publicly about your thinking, you do that every Friday. It's just like going to the gym. You can't help but get better at it. And I certainly sit in, and this is where the podcast does help my business. I sit on, I don't know what the worth is in dollars, but it certainly helps in my business. I sit on a bunch of IP nowadays that has either started in the podcast or got refined. And I think I have one or two pieces where I thought it was cool, but they got dismissed because we could tell by reaction of the podcast that it's not going to fly. So it's insanely valuable. And of the few clients I deal with, if their firms have podcasts, they say the same thing. They say there is this old school model almost where if you're a subject matter expert in a larger firm, right, that they run multiple marketing thought leadership pieces per year or whatnot, the interface you have as a subject matter expert is you are invited to some input sessions. A bunch of writers interviews you once or twice. Then marketing goes off, does their thing. And then you find 20 pages in your inbox with requests to redline those. And then you do that half-heartedly because you're busy and at the airport and you check the box. That's it. But that's a 2-point engagement with that thing. Now imagine you would work around the same topic, but you would do that every second Friday in the year. Would your thinking about it get better? 100%. So that's why I know you agree with me there, but I tend to say if I had to start in-house again and review programs or start to build one out, the podcast will be the first thing I do. I wouldn't even do a blog. The podcast would be the first thing I do, and then everything could come from that. And establishing just the discipline of having that run with regularity is already a big unlock for everything else. And then all about how obviously once it's recorded, it can be turned into all kinds of things, yada yada. So there's all the packaging and the repurposing benefits to it. But just this invest an hour to push forward of thinking is big, and it's certainly been big for me personally to your question.
Yeah, that's been a common theme over the past few podcasters that I've interviewed is podcasting helps organize their thoughts. and talking about these topics. It's kind of like writing a little bit. If you write every day, it clarifies your thoughts. Well, the same thing is true with podcasting. If you get behind the mic and you're talking about these topics, it also helps clarify your thoughts. So yeah, that's.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
What's funny is, because all the stuff we have now, despite it being a hobby project, is actually good enough that I think it might work almost like as a client deliverable. I'm using them as these. So we have, I don't know, in the catalog, there's an episode about service productization and how to think about that as a firm. And we have in consulting engagements, we have workshops around those stuff at the client journey stage. And then sometimes people ask me, should we productize this? And I no longer give them an email or a 2-page write-up of my thinking. I'll just send them the link because I have an episode. So if you can keep the stuff you talk about close to your consulting work, not only the efficiency unlock in that you get to repurpose stuff you have said before as a marketing collateral, it's also the other way around. You can use the marketing collateral you have, give it to people as, here's what I would recommend, go listen to it. We don't need to have this conversation again. I recorded it once, so you go. And people actually like it. They're like, oh my God, you have a podcast? That's cool. So we have again, that's how we sometimes win listeners as well.
Recording conversations with it's useful sales enablement collateral too. So I think to your point about educating clients about certain topics, it's an efficient way to do that. You can point people right to the podcast, they can listen to it and get an understanding of a certain topic without you having to have that conversation with them. In the process, it helps them develop this sort of parasocial relationship with you where they hear your voice, they're familiar with you just from listening to the podcast. And so they feel like they know you on kind of like another level. It's kind of like it's a very interesting phenomenon, but it's another benefit of podcasting.
It is, and it, again, not to beat this drum too much, but it's insanely helpful in professional services for another reason, because I don't know how often you encounter this, but very often I realize that in person, most consultants of some standing are quite good at speaking to their clients' pain points and explaining how they'll help them and so forth. They might have a very informal way of talking. They might be very good with metaphors. They're really good listeners, whatever it is, right? And it comes across and you're like, man, that was genius. And then you go on the website and it says how they build solutions to deliver the results and drive AI powered. And you know what I mean? There's all this generic BS language, which everybody in this industry complains all the time. So when they speak in person, they're 10 times better than what their other marketing collateral does, which is fine. Okay, keep the other collaterals, do more speaking. Again, do the podcast, just works better. Which is that's a pet peeve of mine is marketing. What marketing should be is just take what works in your business development and do that through media and at scale. And if you never say to a client, deliver solutions that drive results, that's like a phrase you would never use. But if you use, I don't know, phrases like, you know what the pain in the ass is with this kind of Azure deployment, well, why not put it on the website? But that's not something. For some reason, it doesn't work in that sector yet.
Because all messaging needs to pass the desk of the CEO, and that's where kind of the buck stops right there. The strategies that work in terms of marketing messages and the types of things that maybe are working in other industries like B2B software or consumer industries are starting to be applied in professional services. And I think that's really cool and it's exciting for the industry. And speaking of business development, Flo, I was listening to a recent episode titled BizDev Magic, where you talked about business development for creative firms. And there's a concept that I'd like to kind of explore and unpack a little bit. I thought you made an interesting point about lead generation being a tactical outcome marketing initiatives. And I run a podcast called Breaking Biz Dev with Mark Wainwright. And we're actually doing an episode where we get perspective from other folks about what's wrong or what's broken about business development. Maybe it's the way it's being practiced today. Maybe it's how it's defined within firms. Curious from your perspective, what do you think is broken about lead generation or perhaps more broadly business development?
If you make lead generation the objective and the outcome you go after, so we do X so that we can have Y as the outcome and Y as the leads, you are setting yourself up for failure because the objective should be to help the audience, right? I have a friend, Luke Myers, who always says business development is rooted in educating the audience. I agree. But I would say the objective is not just educate the audience, but help them. They should be like, your marketing should just be free consulting. Software companies have a free trial or a demo version or whatever, and your marketing content should help people do stuff. I'm just profoundly convinced by this. And that's, I think, what I said back in the day. And that's, if you don't do that, that's one thing that is broken in the industry with regards to lead generation. There are more things that tend to go awry. I can speak to them briefly. The other thing, however, that annoys me greatly is that there are, in the SaaS sphere, there are marketers who I respect like a ton. Chris Walker would be a prime example. Others also bang this drum about how the lead gen playbook is dead and so forth. I know where they're coming from. I understand they're basically saying the same thing, right? If you make generating leads the objective, things go wrong. But the way their stuff gets repeated and the way the message sort of permeates the market is also wrong. Because let's not kid ourselves. Of course, you have to do lead generation. It's just a step in the process, right? If you want to join Chris Walker's public podcasting sessions, you have to go to a form and submit an email. It's not as if he's saying never do a lead gen of any kind. Some sort of transaction has to happen, and at some point in time, people have to give you some information about themselves so you can understand who's coming in the door, right? That's if I want to go shop somewhere, I have to step inside the shop. That just has to happen. So saying it's completely dead and wrong, not good. Making it the holy grail, also not good. Truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that is where we're striving to. And I promised you one more point with professional services. I think in professional services, the prevalent virus is that marketing does lead generation, and we have leads, however we define them, and however we badly treat that process. Stuff gets handed to the business, and then it breaks down because everybody's busy. So
yeah. That's a good one.
There is often, if I step into firms where there is some marketing funnel, lead generation work, whatever, happening, and it's kind of working, there's always dead opportunities in the system because someone brought these people in the shop and then they were left alone because everybody else had to do some project work and that was Friday and they forgot. That's something maybe marketing.
Such is the nature of the feast and famine life cycle of professional services firms. And I think you brought up a really good point about the definition of a lead. And I think that is wildly different from firm to firm in terms of what exactly is a lead. And I think that's part of what is broken around lead generation, at least in my opinion.
Now, I can't remember when the lingo with the leads came up, but when I started like way back when, I don't know, 21, 22 in advertising agency world, we used to call these things inquiries or inquiries.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that's the better phrase because it's very specific what that means. It is an inquiry coming your way where someone asks a question that is interesting enough for your firm to deploy some resources to deal with that question. We're not saying it necessarily leads to business right away, but it is promising enough to say, okay, let's hear this out. And there's way more, as we can infer from that example, it's way more than just an email address. There is an email address probably. There's also a question, right?
What's the intent behind it? Exactly.
There is some intent, and there's even more than that. There is some presumption of expertise on your part because they're asking you, meaning they already understand you might be part of the solution. So, and that is, if you think about it, is a pretty high ladder. Like I meet firms that when they use the term lead, they describe something that's way below that threshold, which is made out there. So we should petition to turn it back to inquiries.
I like this. Yeah. Well, there's 2 signatures on that ballot so far. So
all right. So you have to join up.
Well, Florian, this has been just an excellent conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story about unbillable hours and client friendly and how you founded your firm. For folks that are listening and maybe they want to connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I think it's the best place. They can visit client-friendly.co. I always laugh because a professor at university once said the browser URL thing is not for mathematics, so he hated it when you said minus. So client-friendly.co, there I said it again. And the podcast is also on LinkedIn. If you find me, you can find us there. We do an embarrassingly bad job at marketing it, but we do post the podcast does post on LinkedIn there whenever a new episode drops. That's good.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure to include all those links in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, check it out in the show notes. Links to Client Friendly, links to unbillable hours, links to the LinkedIn page and your profile on LinkedIn. So find all those in the show notes. Florian, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure, John. Thanks for bringing back and wishing you the best of success with this show and all the others you're working on. I'm really enjoying your guys' breaking BizDev piece. I'm subscribed to that. It was great. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you for the kind words. Cheers.